This is the nervous system part 6, final nervous system PowerPoint. There are 6 total. You will have a test in the upcoming week on this content. And this final nervous system video focuses on specialized receptors. And so those are sight, sound, things that are set up to specifically receive a certain type of sensory input. Just a review of the brain and the lobes. Make sure you know what each lobe does and where what information is processed. We're going to talk about the occipital lobe because that is visual processing, and we're also going to talk about the temporal lobe because that is auditory processing or sound. And so we're going to look at those 2 receptors, and so it's important to keep those parts of the brain in mind. We're going to talk about vision first. The human eye is actually a 2-chambered organ. It takes light waves and translates them into signals that become electrical signals, and those signals are sent to the brain, and the brain determines what we do with the visual input that we see. This is the inner portion of the eye. We see that on the far left. That is the lens, and when we go into the eye, there's actually a big fluid-filled sac in space, and so this is kind of looking at it zoomed out a little bit. You need to know the parts of the eye. What's most important is the pupil, which is the hole, the dark circle in our eye, which is actually just an empty space. The iris around it is the colored part of your eye. That is the muscle that opens and closes the pupil to determine how much light is let in. The cornea is a layer on top of the pupil in the iris. It is hard and it is protective. So when we talk about someone scratching their cornea, that is what's happening. The lens is receives the light that is coming through, and it actually flips the image over before it hits the back of the eyeball. And so the light waves travel through the fluid that fills the eye, and they actually hit the retina, which is the very small kind of yellow lining that we see on the inside of the eye. The retina has these cells that receive the light, which we're going to talk about, and then it sends the information to the optic nerve, which connects to the brain. The retina, or the back of the eye, is a really thin layer, contains certain types of light. They are rods and cones, and these are the receptor cells that receive light signals. Once the light hits all the way to the back of the eye, the rods and the cones, the light is actually going to bounce back, and it's going to hit the rods and the cones and then come through to the transmission of rod signals. So we see the connection between the green and the purple and the green and the red. That receives the information after it goes to the rods and the cones. It goes through what we call horizontal cells, bipolar cells, amacrine cells, ganglion cells, and proceeds to the optic nerve. You don't have to know the order of these. What is important is understanding that rods and cones receive the light and then change it into an electrical signal that goes through basically 4 different types of nerve cells to get to the optic nerve. Basically looks like this. So we see that it comes all the way back, the light hits the rods and the cones, it bounces back through a series of cells and then goes to the optic nerve to the brain. So this talks about the chemicals that play a role in our ability to see. We aren't going to talk about this too much right now. I will come back to it, but for now, understanding the rods and the cones idea is the most important. There are certain chemicals that impact how we see, and we see that this connects retinol and rhodopsin connects to this image. What we do need to know is that when our eyes are in the dark, we start producing something called rhodopsin. Rhodopsin builds up in our eyes and it allows us to see at night. The moment that we are exposed to some sort of light source, the rhodopsin starts to break down. And this is why when you see like a flash of light when you're in the dark, your ability to have night vision goes away because all of that rhodopsin has been broken down. And it binds to the rods and the cones, basically. We'll talk a little bit more about this in class. The other type of receptor that I want to talk about is sound transduction in the human ear. But I guess I added these in. Anyway, so rewind for a moment. Why do we have a blind spot? So this is a question that comes up very often. As we can see, if I send light to the back of my eyeball, there are rods and cones everywhere except for one spot, and that is right where the optic nerve exits the back of the eyeball. And so what happens is that there are no rods and cones there, and so if light goes directly to where my optic nerve is exiting my eyeball, I'm actually going to have my blind spot there. And so this is why there's a certain area, like kind of behind our, like to the left and right and back in our field of vision, that does not allow us to see. And if something is, if you've ever closed one eye and then closed the other and your finger moves back and forth, if you're staring at your finger, you have like this shift. It's because of the optic nerve. So moving forward, the human ear. The human ear is a three-part organ, takes in sound waves, translates them into electrical signals, and then sends them to the brain. The three main parts are the outer ear, middle ear, and inner ear. The outer ear is made up of the pinna, which is like the physical ear that we see on the outside, and the auditory canal, which is what you can stick your finger or a Q-tip in. Once we get into the depths of our ear, we have certain parts. And so these are kind of the parts that we talk about. In the middle ear, we've got our eardrum, which is the thing that gets hit with a sound wave and starts to move. There are three small bones, we call them the middle ear bones, that take that mechanical movement and they transmit it to our cochlea, which in turn is an organ that sends the message to the auditory nerves. Keep in mind that when we talk about people with hearing loss and things like that, the most easily fixable hearing loss is damage to the mechanical portion, to the eardrum, to the three bones. Whereas the cochlea, when we talk about someone getting a cochlear implant, that is a very sophisticated organ that converts movements, right, the moving of the eardrum, to an electrical signal. And so getting a cochlear implant is very difficult. That is all we really need to talk about, making sure we understand that there are sometimes very specific receptors for certain inputs. Make sure you understand the working parts of those two sensory receptors.